It's political chaos. British Prime Minister Theresa May tries to hold on to power with a very shaky government after a bruising election which saw her Tory party lose its majority. And the explosive testimony of former FBI Chief James Comey. He tells the Senate that he couldn't trust Donald Trump not to lie about their meetings. We'll examine the fallout from the biggest stories of the past 7 days. This is Insight Review. Welcome to Insight Review. I'm Dana Lewis. Our look back at the stories that have dominated the headlines for the past 7 days. Britain's snap general election creates new political uncertainty with little more than a week before Brexit negotiations. It is the Super Bowl of Senate hearings. James Comey goes into detail about his memos regarding his meetings with Donald Trump, and Turkey comes to Qatar's rescue after its Gulf neighbors cut ties. We'll examine those issues with our guest, broadcaster and economist Linda Yu, and PR consultant and the former director of communication in Downing Street, Giles Kenningham. But first, here's Insight's Liam Desborough with what you need to know about what happened this week, 7 days in 60 seconds.
London has been the target of yet another terrorist attack. 3 men killed 8 people and injured dozens more using knives and a truck. The attackers were shot dead at the scene. The Iranian government has said that the men who launched a bomb and machine gun attack in Tehran were Iranians who had joined Daesh. 13 people were killed in the attacks, which took place at the country's parliament and the mausoleum of Ayatollah Khomeini. Qatar has been cut off by its Gulf neighbors. Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Yemen, as well as Egypt have all isolated the country. They say Qatari support for militant groups is destabilizing the region. 38-year-old Leo Varadkar has become Ireland's first gay leader after winning the leadership of the country's largest party. When he takes power, he will become the republic's youngest leader and first from a minority ethnic background. And Japanese monarch Emperor Akihito can now abdicate his throne. Japan's parliament passed a one-off piece of legislation in order to allow the move. He's the first emperor to do so in 200 years.
Former FBI Director James Comey has had his chance to set the record straight in regards to his encounters with President Donald Trump. Comey gave a candid opening statement where he thanked and praised his staff at the FBI before taking questions from senior senators. During the 3-hour hearing, the committee heard why Comey felt it important to document his meetings with the president.
What was it about that meeting that led you to determine that you needed to start putting down a written record?
A combination of things. I think the circumstances, the subject matter, and the person I was interacting with. I was honestly concerned that he might lie about the nature of our meeting, and so I thought it really important to document.
But why didn't you stop and say, Mr. President, this is wrong. I cannot discuss this with you?
It's a great question. Maybe if I were stronger, I would have. I was so stunned by the conversation that I just took it in. And the only thing I could think to say, because I was playing in my mind, because I was going to remember every word he said, I was playing in my mind, what should my response be? And that's why I very carefully chose the words. And look, I've seen the tweet about tapes. Lordy, I hope they're tapes.
With me in the studio to discuss that, broadcaster and economist Linda Yu, and PR consultant and former director of communication at Downing Street, Giles Kenningham. High drama. I mean, surely this has bruised the Trump White House, to make an understatement. Do you want to take it first, Linda?
Yeah, well, one of the first things that President Donald Trump did after the hearing was to tweet, "This is not real." And I think obviously we heard there in the clip that James Comey was talking about the ongoing, I suppose, Twitter conversation that he has had with the president.
Trump's done another one, by the way. He says, despite so many false statements and lies, total and complete vindication, and wow, Comey is a leaker.
I think
vindication?
Well, I just think it's amazing. You know, he governs the way he campaigned. It is complete chaos. And I think this whole saga, there's a huge opportunity cost to Trump because he's not pursuing his agenda. He's being caught up in this. And this could really be the defining issue of his whole presidency. I think it's incredibly dangerous. In the first 4 or 5 months of being president or prime minister, you have this window within which you can really set out your agenda. You can define yourself. And at the moment, Trump is being defined by one crisis after another.
One crisis after another, which means this is not going to go away either. I mean, we're now talking about a full-on investigation likely by the Justice Department into obstruction of justice. So that's no vindication.
No, I mean, sorry, on that, I don't think this hasn't been a smoking gun yet. But the whole issue is, like you said, it's just dominating the agenda. And it may well be it's all about the cover-up, not the actual issue at stake.
I think the obstruction of justice point is going to be the key one. So if you think back to the President Clinton, he had been impeached by the House of Representatives, not by the Senate. And the obstruction of justice was actually the charge that ultimately caused that sequence to happen. And so this Russia investigation, where from what we've heard from the James Comey testimony so far, there are indications that President Trump wanted him to lift the cloud of the Russia investigation. He said he wanted to know if he was under investigation.
And when he wouldn't.
And yeah, indeed. And I think you can already see this will not be the last of this issue. And I think it's become such a big issue for the Trump administration that, yes, it's affecting his policy agenda. But even the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, has come out to say, Trump is new at this. There's no malintent here. He just doesn't know how to deal with his FBI director.
Notice he seemed very interested in trying to navigate the halls of Washington very well.
I think what you see is he doesn't do nuance. He doesn't do diplomacy.
But Comey sure does, right? Because he leaks this memo, which goes from a friend to the New York Times, and he's absolutely, I mean, he's not just trying to talk and save his reputation. He wants special counsel to be appointed, and that memo leads them to do so.
Yeah, he's an operator. He's part of the Washington establishment, which Trump isn't. And for Trump, I think he sees everything in black and white. But actually, that's not how politics works. That's not how US politics works either.
It's very interesting that, in fact, President Trump has retained outside counsel. There's lots of lawyers inside the White House. What does it tell you that he's retained outside counsel?
I think that tells you that obstruction charge is the one that we have to keep watching for, because in a lot of ways, it's almost impossible, not impossible, but almost impossible for the president to do something against the law, because he is the chief law enforcer. But on obstruction of justice, if you look in the Constitution, it is one of the high crimes that go to treason. Anyways, not to get too dramatic, but that's why in the American legal system, anything which could be possibly, like he's impeded a lawful investigation, just like President Clinton had issues over perjury, that was over an affair, it's not the underlying issue, it's the conduct. And that's why he's engaged counsel, and
long conversation, Linda, right? Because the legal framework for this is uncharted territory. Whether you go after a president while he's in office, do you go after him afterwards? What is the intent of obstruction of justice? How do you prove it? Lots of room for the lawyers in Washington. The United Kingdom, let's talk about its early general election, has resulted in a hung parliament, meaning no party has enough power to rule. When the election was called more than 6 weeks ago, Prime Minister Theresa May's governing Conservative Party had been on target for a confident victory. However, a poorly run campaign and the popularity of the opposition Labour Party saw them lose ground to their rivals.
Incredible result for the Labour Party because people voted for hope. Young people and old people all came together yesterday. Very high turnout, huge increase in the Labour vote. And they did it because they want to see things done differently and they want hope in their lives. We put on more than 3 million votes yesterday. It was her campaign, it was her decision to call the election, it was her name out there, and she was saying she was doing it to bring about strong and stable government. Well, this morning it doesn't look like a strong government, it doesn't look like a stable government, it doesn't look like a government that has any programme whatsoever.
What the country needs more than ever is certainty. And having secured the largest number of votes and the greatest number of seats in the general election, it is clear that only the Conservative and Unionist Party has the legitimacy and ability to provide that certainty by commanding a majority in the House of Commons. As we do, we will continue to work with our friends and allies in the Democratic Unionist Party in particular. Our two parties have enjoyed a strong relationship over many years, and this gives me the confidence to believe that we will be able to work together in the interests of the whole United Kingdom.
Giles, over to you. You were in communications in 10 Downing. You were the director of communications under Cameron. What would you be telling Theresa May right now?
I think the real challenge for the UK is how do they convey certainty in a very uncertain environment.
Certainly to who? The voters? To the EU?
To the voters, to the world, saying, look, we're still a stable country, come here and invest. But I think that's very difficult without a majority government. And look, let's be honest, it is a disaster. And really, it's like, where do we go from here? To be honest, I think she's on borrowed time. She certainly won't be fighting the next election, that's for sure.
How do they rule right now, Linda? They do a deal with who? How?
Possibly the Democratic Unionist Party, DUP, in Northern Ireland, who are actually pro-Brexit. And it wouldn't be the first time the DUP has propped up
But consistently voting against Tory welfare cuts, I mean, very surprisingly anti-austerity. That's a very difficult marriage.
It is. But I think what the Conservatives are probably positioning themselves anyways is that they're going to give way on austerity, because that is in the DUP's manifesto. They're against the social care cuts, and essentially elevate Brexit, which has got to be kind of the main issue. In fact, if you recall, that was why this snap election was called, which was to give the British government a stronger mandate to pursue Brexit.
And it's a train wreck now in their negotiations with Brexit, potentially, because the EU will see them as very weak now. How does that play out? Hard Brexit, soft Brexit?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult because she'll have competing factions in her party having different demands.
And very bold now, emboldened now to stand up and say, we're not going to go along with you.
Exactly. You know, you see the power has drained away from her, and it's very hard to govern, which is why I think she is on borrowed time. And if you look at kind of a key flashpoint in this election, I would say it was the manifestos. You know, Labour's manifesto leaked. Actually, it's probably the best thing that happened to them because it dominated the news agenda for quite a few days.
How much borrowed time?
I don't know. Look, I hate to get into predictions.
Take a jump.
Come on, look.
October?
What's happened over the past year? I'd hate to get into predictions, but clearly it doesn't look good for her. And look, at the best of times, the Tory party is not sentimental. They get rid of leaders very, very efficiently and brutally. So I just think for her, you know, the best thing to do is perhaps, you know, try and create a stable transition. But I cannot see in a couple of years her still being in number 10.
Linda, do you agree she's finished?
I think it'd be very difficult for her to continue for a long while. And in fact, Arlene Foster, who's the head of the DUP, whose support the Tories would need in order to govern, has said that it's, quote, very difficult for Theresa May to remain. And I think we've also heard that in terms of why she called the election, she was, remember, governing as an unelected Prime Minister, and the fact that she essentially has come out in a weakened position, it doesn't give her that mandate that she herself has said that she wishes to have in order to pursue Brexit. So I think in many ways, that's essentially her also laying out the groundwork that she's a political realist. This is how the Tories are. It's very difficult for a Prime Minister who has a result like this, losing a majority when she didn't have to call the election, to then carry on. You have to fall on your sword.
Charles, you wanted to jump in there. And I would note, as you're talking about it, you know, a lot of people made up their minds at the last minute, 26% of the voters, and you had the real young youth vote come out here and jump to Labour.
I mean, I think the irony is here that a lot of the public did not know Theresa May very well. When they didn't know her very well, she was quite high in the polls. The more she talked, the less people listened. I think that is absolutely devastating. You talk about young people. Yes, Labour ran a very effective media operation on social media. They energized that young base who don't normally go and vote, and they went to the polls.
Did terror play into it? I mean, you've had Manchester, you had the stabbings play out just days before the election. Was security an issue? And over again, Labour's been hammering her about cutting the 20,000 police when she was Home Secretary.
Very hard to say. Obviously, horrendous events. They did disrupt the cycle of the campaign. I do know from having spoken to people who work in counter-terrorism in the Met that clearly one issue is neighbourhood policing, and they have said that the cutbacks there have affected their intelligence networks. But yeah, it's been quite a strange election because you had two horrendous events which, you know, affected the whole campaign and the cycle, and you had a U-turn by a governing party which is almost unprecedented, I think.
Linda, do you want to take a guess at who's going to come out of the fold very quickly here and, you know, as Theresa May is wounded and you know, hobbling down to Buckingham Palace saying we're going to hold it together, we're going to keep a governing parliament in place. Who, Boris Johnson?
I was going to say the usual suspects. I think David Davis, the Brexit secretary, had been touted as somebody who could have come to the fore, but apparently he is one of the people who pushed for a snap election. Amber Rudd, the Home Secretary, who was on the up, barely clung on to her seat. I think it doesn't look like she has there's a huge amount of front runners at the moment.
I have to ask Charles as well.
Yeah, I would frame it as a Boris Johnson versus Amber Rudd contest. Yeah.
All right, this is Insight Review coming up. Planes diverted, roads closed. Saudi Arabia leads a bloc of countries to isolate Qatar.